Hi, I'm Ravi. I'm a longtime practitioner of the spiritual path, and today I wanted to share some insights about spirituality. So the topic I was thinking about today is how to read spiritual texts for spiritual growth. So there's a couple of important qualifiers there. So we're thinking about spiritual texts, reading that category of texts, and for the specific purpose of gaining spiritual growth. So it's not reading spiritual texts for the purposes of writing an academic paper or for the purposes of learning about it just for pleasure reading. It's for the specific purpose of spiritual growth. And we're reading spiritual texts, so not texts about current affairs or biographies or even literature, but texts that are written from a spiritual consciousness. And that's how I characterize the category of spiritual texts. We know what this looks like informally. They're the kind of texts you'd find at a spiritual or metaphysical bookstore, or the great texts of the world's religions. Probably not the ones you'd find in the mystery section or the romance section of the bookstore or the current affairs section. These are spiritual texts written by usually spiritually realized figures or practitioners at some level, written with the purpose of communicating spiritual knowledge. So there is one tendency in spirituality saying that you don't need to read about spirituality. You'll just fill your head with ideas, and what you really need is spiritual practice. So I do think it's possible to be a very high level spiritual practitioner without ever reading much. You can just follow the path of the heart. You can follow a guru, any of these other follow a structured program without a lot of reading necessarily. But for a lot of people, reading is helpful just for acquiring the right information. And for other reasons that I'll get into, it has other spiritual benefits that are not as immediately apparent from our normal practice of just reading normal books. There are specific spiritual benefits that come from reading spiritual texts from a certain range of consciousness. So I'll go into that in a little bit. So I do think it is an important practice if you're willing to undertake it. Um, and it can be just one more tool in your toolbox alongside the more psychological or embodied or meditative practices that you do. I'm definitely not suggesting stop your meditation practice and just read. It's one part of the practice along with others. So why is reading such a powerful practice? It's because language is the most flexible method we have of communicating, and it can't communicate everything. It can't directly communicate the experience of spiritual revelation, but it's the closest thing that we have um, for communicating it in a kind of systematic, en masse way. Um, so different spiritual gurus do have ways of inducing spiritual experience directly, but you can't scale that out to um, passing knowledge down intergenerationally or to mass groups of the public or to people that are far away in another country. Um, reading is kind of the most, reading and writing is kind of our most stable technology for communication. And that's why writing has taken such an important part of our evolution as a human species and why it's still important in a spiritual context. So yeah, right now I'll just go into five methods of getting spiritual benefit from texts, from treating reading as a spiritual practice, reading a spiritual text as a spiritual practice. So the first method is feeling the direct consciousness of the spiritual writer and coming to contact with their consciousness and actually getting the direct benefit of their spiritual consciousness just from reading the words. So this is a really powerful and underrated reason, I think, for why to read spiritual texts. If you're reading a text by a spiritual master, you can get in tune with their energy, the energy of their mind and soul, just from being receptive to the energy of the written language, and that attunes your being to their energy, and that uplifts your being to raise it closer to their spiritual level. Um, so I experienced this extensively in my reading of Sri Aurobindo, uh, from reading his texts across many genres. I've been able to kind of sync my consciousness to his consciousness by getting a very distinct idea of the vibration of his consciousness from reading these words. It's not just the concepts, but the rhythm of the language, the word choice he uses, the personality that comes through the language, all of that can bring you into contact with the spiritual consciousness of the writer. And if the writer is on a high spiritual level, that can raise your own spiritual consciousness. So I find that this is a really powerful method. So if there are any spiritual figures that you're especially drawn to, I'd recommend reading some of their texts and seeing if you can get on their spiritual wavelength, kind of tuning into the energy of their spiritual presence through the reading of their work, and hopefully that will let you tune into their spiritual energy better and derive spiritual benefit from that relationship between your consciousnesses. Um, so again, this has nothing to do with the actual concepts that are in play. This even works if you don't understand the concepts that they're writing about at all. And that's true for some, very advanced or very complicated uh, uh, philosophies or spiritual disciplines that you might read about. You might not have the experience yet that they're talking about, but still just participating in that energy exchange is still a powerful practice. So that's the first method. The second method, though, is to try to understand what they're saying and use their description of practices to kind of inform the structure of your practice. So if they're writing about a technique to do meditation, you can take that information, which is presented in a really compact form, and try to apply it directly in your life as your meditation practice. And a lot of times in these writings, they'll make really good distinctions that you wouldn't have been able to come up with yourself just by trying to figure things out on your own. They've gone through the process of organizing the domain of spiritual knowledge and practice in a really effective way, and being able to pass that knowledge on to you again in a compact way. Um, so, for example, I never would have learned about the practice of karma yoga if it weren't for reading the work of Sri Aurobindo. So, karma yoga is a really major part of my spiritual practice now. The practice of offering my work as an offering, a spiritual offering to the divine. I wouldn't know what it is or how to do it if I didn't read about it in Sri Aurobindo's texts. So again, this is probably the most straightforward and non-energetic way we'll be discussing. It's just a straightforward application of the information that you read in the spiritual text to your own life. The third method, though, is a little bit more expansive, which is that you can use the description of your experiences that they give in a spiritual text to kind of stimulate your imagination and kind of simulate the experiences before you actually experience them. Um, so what I mean by this is uh, a advanced spiritual practitioner might have a spiritual experience that you haven't been aware of, like the Sri Aurobindo speaks often of the absolute equality that comes with being one with the static aspect of Brahman. So if you haven't had that experience, you can read about what Sri Aurobindo says about how equality is the state where you're immune from praise and blame, and you're not moved by the different reactions that take place in your outer consciousness, and you stay stable and very just deeply attuned to um, the stable nature of the divine, which is kind of like the underneath the ocean, underneath the waves of the ocean, the deep stability that you feel in the ocean. So without necessarily having that practice or doing that practice extensively of doing equality, you can tune into that experience that is written about and kind of get the initial hint of that experience just from the description of it in the writing without actually having that experience. And that's not to say that you want to stop there. You actually do want to go do the practice that it takes to realize that experience fully. But what the text does is give you the preview of that experience, so you know what direction to go in to get to that final experience, and give you an idea of it before you actually get there. So it's sort of like a preview. And without that preview, you might not know like what the point of doing these various exercises is or what exactly you're trying to look for. But the descriptions of the text can give you this sort of preview of of what consciousness is like on the other side of these spiritual realizations, and that can provide you guidance and motivation and structure on your path to getting to those transitions. The fourth one is also a kind of thing of micro images, and this is what I call micro images of sacredness. And I get this especially from reading kind of hagiographies and accounts of the lives of great spiritual practitioners, which is seeing all the different micro expressions and micro gestures and micro movements of life that are associated with these great holy people. And that shows you, it brings you in deeper touch with the personality aspect of the divine. Um, because I think one tendency in the modern mind is to view God as just this kind of abstract entity or abstract energy that is very remote from us and very cut off from our normal experience and just kind of unintelligible. But when the divine incarnates into spiritual masters, the divine kind of merges with their personality, or the divine even can be seen as being incarnate in that personality. And all the things about a personality that we kind of adore and love and a human personality, they're now reflections of an aspect of divinity. So the characteristic way somebody makes a joke, for example, so Sri Aurobindo has this very playful way of joking around with his um, Sadaks, his spiritual aspirants, and the mother Mira Alfasa, she has this very ironic tone sometimes. So behind those tones and that playfulness, you can get a sense of what the irony or the playfulness of the divine might be like. You can imagine the divine as having this sense of humor. Or there's another story from another book that I'm thinking about by a disciple of Mira Alfasa, the mother, talking about how at one time this disciple was feeling troubled, and the mother came to her and said, I can see all your worries. You're worried about all these things, but Sri Aurobindo and I have come to, take all these worries away and reach the perfection this time, so we don't need to keep worrying about all these things. And it was phrased in a much more eloquent way that I'm not remembering right now. But I found that deeply moving, just the compassion that the mother had for this suffering aspirant, and I was kind of experiencing a bout of suffering myself at that time, and I could feel that compassion being exuded towards me in my situation, and it was deeply moving. Um, and then other little things like seeing, how the mother might deal with people that are, you know, dealing with organizing a music recital, or how she really valued people that were really good at things they did in work, like um, somebody would be really good at folding an envelope, and the mother would value them as a worker, even if they didn't do much well besides that. So the capacity of the divine to find even little things of value um, without needing everything to be perfect. So you can tell a lot about. The thing is that the divine is so multifaceted and has so many what seem like contradictions to our mind, that if we have this unitary mental idea of the divine, it's so much less than the actual richness of the divine. And seeing the personality come out in these more applied hagiography personality descriptions, um, it's a really wonderful way to get a sense of the texture and the different interplay of these different things that can be associated to the energy of divinity. It's not just one thing, it's this million little things, million little gestures that can be encoded with this divine energy. And it's not just about these big unitary ideas like Brahman. It's much more rich than that. So you can find these for a lot of the great specifically for Sri Aurobindo and Mira Alfasa, the mother, there are many books by disciples about their experiences with these gurus. Um, I'm sure it's the same for other gurus. There might be disciples writing about them and writing about their experiences, or there might be different biographers. I know for Ramakrishna, there are several biographies about him, giving kind of different stories of his life, different aspects of his experience, like going to the temple and having these fits of ecstasy in the Kali temple, all these significant uh, aspects of his life and personality that show you these aspects of divinity that are very multifaceted and rich and not just reducible to one or two big ideas about what divinity is. So the fifth point is you can get advice as to what to do in a very kind of straightforward way, as in a way that we're all kind of looking for in our own lives. And you'll find this especially in books of letters to disciples. So Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have many books where they write letters to disciples about their issues and problems that they're facing in their life, psychological, moral, circumstantial, but also biographies of the saints, where you can see what their reactions are to different situations and how they go about living through the problems of life. Um, yeah, so this is valuable because we all seek advice from people for the different situations that we face, um, whether it be what to do about a career or a relationship or just an argument that happens between people, or how to view something that happened from a spiritual perspective, whether it be a misfortune or a good fortune. But the sources of advice we usually have are the people around us who are um, in the ordinary consciousness and not necessarily spiritual masters. But when we read these sources of advice from spiritual masters, we can see what they would do from this elevated spiritual perspective, how they would deal with these kinds of problems. And it doesn't always apply directly to your situation because every situation is different, but it can give you an idea of how to deal with it. Um, and if nothing else, then at least some inspiration or solace that, this spiritual master was able to comfort this other human in their time of need, and yeah, show them a way forward. So another place to look for this is in biographies, where you can see the different situations that these spiritual masters faced and how they handled them. This is similar to the reason why people read political biographies, for example, to see how somebody handled their career or something like that. But in the case of the spiritual masters, we want to see how they handle it from a specifically spiritual perspective and not just from the usual motives of personal ambition or living a good normal life as it's usually thought of. Yeah, so hopefully this gave some insights on some different ways to read texts for specifically spiritual benefit. Um, and this is a really beneficial practice. I think if you know how to use it. Again, shouldn't make it our only practice. We still need to meditate and practice emotional discipline, and learn how to manage our reactions and things like that. So we don't want to stop doing else but anything else but our reading practice. But I think reading in the spiritual domain, it is an underrated practice because of the different kinds of energies we can come into contact with through reading if we know how to use it well. So I hope this gave you some ideas of how to do that. Yep. So if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and please tune in next week for the next video. Thanks.